This week, I've been looking into sump pumps. I had no idea what a sump pump was until last week. I spent an unhealthy amount of time looking at YouTube videos to understand what they are, how they work, why they're important. So if you don't know, consider this your introduction to sump pumps. So a sump pump is basically a pump that's in your basement that collects the water that's accumulating under the foundation of your house. If you live in a high flood area and or high water table area, which means the water in the ground is quite high, so you might have a need for a pump that's going to work pretty much every day to pump out the water from under your house so it doesn't collect into your house. The reason I started looking into sump pumps to begin with was that it kept showing up so much so that I had to kind of stop ignoring it and actually look into it. General business idea is to do install redundancies and remote monitoring, which is already something that other people do. The main flaw that I found is that most systems are Wi-Fi enabled, which in the basement is not always the best, but also when there's a storm, which usually creates the water issues. If you don't have power, you can't monitor your sump pump, which is kind of stupid if you ask me. So what I would like to do is set up a system that doesn't require Wi-Fi, that we have a redundancy, and then we can also track for a problem. So if your main pump stops working, we have a backup pump. And while our backup pump is working, we already have someone who's going to come check your main pump. So the plan is to kind of help you buy peace of mind, essentially. The reason sump pumps are critical for most homes in Quebec, you have to have one. Sump pumps is usually this thing that you install in your basement and then, you kind of forget about it until you have a flooding. And getting a significant amount of water in your house is never good. The downsides of having a sump pump that does not work properly are extremely high. It was fitting the criteria and a lot of the things that I was looking at in terms of it's somewhat recurring. You're buying something that very, very low churn because there's not a point where you would be okay with your basement flooding. And in a lot of cases, in high flood areas, there is also a concern as to insurability. So if you've had other floods in the past, there's also a point where insurance company won't want to insure you unless you have monitoring. So it kind of becomes a requirement. And basically, I like this idea of buying peace of mind. I mean, there are a lot of things about it from a operationalization point of view that are tricky. The biggest risk is you don't want to have someone pay for an insurance policy and then they flood and then I get sued because their basement is flooded. So limiting liability is obviously going to be very high priority as far as like setting up a business and setting it up in a way that I can provide the service, but also the service needs to work. That's the main thing. So I've always been super interested by the white glove approach. I want the experience to be as nice as possible for clients. I think this approach for me would be a done for you service, whereas if you're looking at the current state of markets, there's a couple things. People are either doing a setup that's been installed by those basement companies that set everything up, and then there's a pump there and you hope that it works until it doesn't. Otherwise, there's these DIYers, so people are going to install a pump and or a redundancy, which usually, and in the case where they have monitoring, it's often Wi-Fi. And having monitoring doesn't mean that the problem gets fixed. It just means you're going to wake up at 2 a.m. to an alarm on your phone, and then you still have to get up and go fix whatever problems. So that way I become the monitoring, but I also become the don't worry, we got this service. And I think this idea of buying peace of mind makes it really hard for people to decide they don't want your service anymore. So I think selling this might be interesting. I don't know if that's actually going to work, but I feel like door-to-door or door hangers or something might be actually something interesting. And getting referrals, so if you get a neighbor, you can get them to especially in like places where there's like a geographic constraint where it's like a high water table or a flood zone. I think that might be interesting to test out for sure. I mean, I could for sure run ads, but I don't know that that's something that's, it's not something that's super appealing to me. Like, it doesn't sound like as fun for me. So I want to do like, physical stuff. I think working with home inspectors and also working with basement installation companies. So like the companies that are doing like basement systems are usually the ones who are installing the sump pump to begin with, or the sump pit. If you're doing major renovations and there isn't one and you're installing a new one, they are often going to offer some kind of like they don't really do the maintenance, right? Like they're going to sell you the big ticket item, which is the basement, charge you $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 for it, and then you're never going to hear from them again. So there's a world where I could kind of work with those companies and provide the service afterwards. So if I set up this service where I own the business side and the monitoring side, and then I have a partner who happens to be a plumber, I can do the preventative maintenance. I can also do the issues, fix the issues as they occur or before or after. And there's also value for the plumbers. So I think it's like an interesting thing. I'm not far enough into it that I know exactly, I have a general idea of this is how we're monitoring, this is how we're installing the system, and what the cost structure should be. But I think I'm at the point now where I want to talk to homeowners. I want to understand how big of a problem this is for the homeowners, but I also want to see, for plumbers, like, is there value for this for plumbers? Should I have like a model where like, DoorDash, where I have a bunch of plumbers and I dispatch jobs? Or do I just become a company that eventually owns that part of the operations as well? Because I mean, short term, I would obviously work with a plumber because I'm probably not going to have any significant volumes. But I would also assume that if there is a high segment of my clients that are living in the high flood areas, when there is a flooding, it's all of them at once. So there is some kind of bandwidth concern that I will have at some point, I'm assuming. So yeah, if you have a house and a sump pump and you would be open to talking to me about it, I have like a bunch of questions. I'm not at a point where I want to sell anything, but if you are interested in knowing more about this, or if you are the kind of, do-it-yourself person and have a setup that you've tinkered on and want to share, I would be super curious to know more about that. Feel free to message me somewhere. I would love to pick your brain for like 5-10 minutes.